Life after a parent's death rarely moves in a straight line. For the young adult at the center of this story, days felt quiet on the surface but heavy underneath. The house still smelled like old books, tea, and the familiar scent of someone who once filled every room with calm authority. Mornings came slowly. Nights felt longer than before. There was no loud grief, no dramatic crying fits. Just a steady ache that followed every small task, from making breakfast to locking the front door. The father had been a simple man. He believed in routine, honesty, and working hard without making noise about it. He did not chase attention or wealth. What he built came from years of effort and patience. A small house, a bit of land, some savings, and most importantly, a sense of security for the child he loved deeply. He often spoke about planning ahead, about making sure nothing would fall apart after he was gone. Those words echoed now, stronger than ever. After the funeral, relatives came and went. Some offered real comfort. Others came more out of habit than care. Among them were two people who stayed longer than expected. They were family, close enough to speak freely, close enough to feel trusted. At first, their presence felt helpful. They brought food, handled small errands, and spoke gently about the past. Their voices carried sympathy, but their eyes seemed restless, always scanning the room, always lingering a little too long on cupboards, drawers, and old files. The young adult noticed small things but said nothing. When grief is fresh, the mind often looks for peace, not conflict. It felt easier to assume good intentions. After all, they were family. They had shared meals together many times before. They had laughed in the same living room, sat at the same table, and spoken about future plans that never sounded harmful. But slowly, the tone began to change. Conversations drifted away from memories and toward questions. Questions about paperwork. Questions about bank accounts. Questions about whether the father had organized everything properly. The questions were often wrapped in concern, spoken with soft voices and careful smiles. Still, they came too often, and they came from the same two people. At first, the young adult answered politely, then more carefully, then with growing discomfort. There was a sense that every answer was being measured, stored away, compared with something else. When asked about documents, the response was always honest. Nothing had been checked yet. Everything felt too raw. There would be time later. That answer seemed to disappoint them. Their visits became frequent, sometimes unannounced, sometimes late in the evening. They would sit quietly, looking around, pretending to listen while the young adults spoke about daily struggles. Their kindness began to feel rehearsed, as if it had a purpose beyond comfort. They praised the father often, but their praise felt shallow, repeated, and oddly timed. The house itself seemed to sense the shift. Drawers were not always left the way they were remembered. Papers appeared slightly moved. The study room, once private and respected, became a place they asked to enter freely. Each request came with a smile, but the pressure behind it was hard to miss. Despite all this, the young adult remained calm. There was no anger yet, only confusion. Grief can make people slow to react. It blurs instincts and delays judgment. More than anything, there was a desire to avoid drama. The last thing needed was family conflict layered on top of loss. Days passed. Life tried to return to something normal. Work resumed. Bills needed attention. The house needed cleaning. While sorting through old belongings, the young adult spent more time in the father's study. It was a quiet room filled with notebooks, old receipts, faded letters, and legal folders stacked neatly but untouched. That room held the strongest presence of the father. Sitting there felt like sitting beside him. It brought comfort but also responsibility. There was a growing understanding that whatever had been left behind needed to be handled carefully, not rushed, not shared too freely. The two relatives noticed this change. They began asking more direct questions. Their words lost some of their softness. One of them joked about how documents can disappear if no one pays attention. The joke was followed by laughter, but the laughter did not reach the eyes. Another comment followed a day later, suggesting that handling legal matters alone could be confusing, and that help might be needed. The young adult felt something tighten inside. It was not fear yet. It was awareness. There was a quiet decision made that evening. Important papers would be kept close. Access to the study would be limited. Trust, once given freely, would now be guarded. This decision was not spoken out loud. It lived quietly in the mind, growing stronger with every strange look and every carefully worded question. At night, sleep came in broken pieces. Thoughts repeated themselves. Why were they so interested? Why now? Why only them? Memories of the father's warnings returned. He had once said that money changes people, even those you think you know well. At the time, it sounded like general advice. Now, it felt personal. One afternoon, while the relatives were visiting again, the young adult stepped into another room to take a call. Voices carried through the hallway. They were low, rushed, and not meant to be overheard. Only fragments could be heard, but they were enough. Words like papers, before it's too late, and they don't know yet hung in the air. The call ended, but the words stayed. When returning to the room, the conversation stopped instantly. Smiles returned. The moment passed as if nothing had happened. But something had shifted for good. The feeling in the chest was no longer confusion. It was certainty that something was wrong. From that day on, the young adult became more observant. Every movement was noticed. Every question was examined. Trust had not fully broken yet, but it was cracking. There was still no clear proof. No direct threat. No open conflict. Just a growing sense that the quiet life left behind by the father was about to be disturbed. That the peace he worked so hard to protect was being tested. And somewhere inside the house, among old files and sealed envelopes, lay answers that could change everything. Part 1 of the story ends here, not with action or confrontation, but with the calm before something darker. A moment where grief, trust, and hidden intentions exist side by side, waiting for the truth to surface. The days that followed felt heavier than before, even though nothing obvious had changed. Life still moved through the same routine. Morning light entered the house through the same windows. The street outside sounded the same. But inside, the young adult felt a quiet pressure, like something important was being watched, measured, and slowly closing in. The two relatives continued visiting. Their behavior stayed polite, but the warmth felt thinner now. They asked fewer questions directly, yet their interest had not disappeared. It had only shifted. Instead of asking, they observed. Instead of talking, they waited. Silence became their new way of pushing. The young adult kept busy on purpose. Cleaning rooms that did not need cleaning. Organizing shelves already in order. Staying out of the study when they were around. It was not fear that caused this behavior, but instinct. A sense that staying alert mattered. One afternoon, while the house was finally empty, the young adult returned to the study. Dust floated in the sunlight as old files were pulled from a cabinet. Some folders contained receipts, some old letters, some work papers. Nothing surprising at first. The process felt slow, almost peaceful. There was comfort in touching things the father once handled, in seeing his neat handwriting on envelopes and notes. At the back of the cabinet, behind a stack of unused notebooks, something different appeared. A large envelope, sealed and untouched. The paper was thick, official-looking, and marked carefully. It did not feel like something meant for daily use. It felt important. The young adult hesitated. Opening it felt like crossing a line, but curiosity mixed with responsibility won. Inside were legal documents, carefully prepared, clearly written, and signed properly. It did not take long to understand what they were. It was the father's will. There was no shock in the content itself. The father had always spoken about planning ahead. The will reflected that. Everything was clear, fair, and intentional. The house, the savings, and a few personal items were left to protect the future of the child he trusted most. There was no confusion, no shared control, no space for argument. It was simple and direct. But with understanding came fear. The young adult's hands trembled slightly while placing the papers back inside the envelope. The earlier conversations, the strange jokes, the overheard whispers, they all suddenly made sense. This was what the relatives wanted. This was what they were searching for without asking directly. The envelope was hidden again, deeper than before, placed somewhere only the young adult could reach. The cabinet was locked. The key stayed close. That evening, the relatives returned. Their timing felt wrong, too perfect. They sat in the living room, smiling, speaking about everyday things. One of them casually mentioned legal matters, pretending it was general advice. The other nodded along, adding comments about how complicated wills could be, how mistakes were common, how people often needed help understanding what was written. The young adult listened quietly. Every word felt louder now. Every pause felt meaningful. There was no confrontation, no accusations, just careful listening. Later that night, after they left, sleep did not come easily. The mind replayed everything. The will was safe for now, but safety felt temporary. A decision had to be made soon. Doing nothing was no longer an option. The next day, the young adult spoke with someone trustworthy. Not about details, but about next steps. Advice was simple and firm. Important documents should be protected legally and physically. Silence was not weakness, but delay could be dangerous. From that moment, the young adult changed. There was more confidence in movements, less hesitation in speech. Answers to questions became shorter and more controlled. When asked about paperwork, the response was calm but firm. Everything was being handled privately. This change did not go unnoticed. The relatives began to show irritation in small ways. Their smiles faded faster. Their visits grew shorter but more intense. One of them started sending messages, asking to meet alone. The other suggested walks, private talks, moments away from the house. Each request was declined politely. The tension grew thicker with every refusal. The air between them felt tight, as if one wrong word could tear it open. Still, the young adult remained composed. Fear was present, but it did not control behavior. The father's voice echoed in memory, reminding that standing firm mattered more than staying comfortable. One afternoon, while stepping out to run an errand, the young adult noticed the two relatives standing across the street, speaking in low voices. They stopped when noticed. A forced smile appeared. A wave followed. That was the moment everything felt real. This was no longer about curiosity or family concern. It was about control, about taking something that did not belong to them. That evening, a message arrived. An invitation, a suggestion to talk openly, to clear misunderstandings, to bring peace back into the family. The location was near a quiet area outside town, close to a river known for its calm paths and empty walking trails. The message sounded reasonable, friendly, almost caring. The young adult stared at the phone for a long time. Saying no might anger them. Saying yes might be risky. But avoiding them forever was impossible. A careful decision was made. The will would stay hidden. A trusted person would know where the young adult was going. The meeting would happen, but cautiously. There was still hope, somewhere deep down, that this could end with words instead of conflict. As night fell, the river reflected the fading sky, quiet and still. It looked peaceful from a distance, unaware of the tension walking toward it. Part 2 ends here, with truth uncovered, trust broken, and a meeting ahead that would change everything. The walk toward the river felt longer than it really was. Each step carried a mix of doubt and resolve. The young adult kept breathing slow, reminding themselves that staying calm mattered more than anything else. The sky was pale, the air cool, and the path ahead looked quiet. Too quiet. The two relatives were already there, standing near the water's edge. They smiled when they saw the young adult approach, but the smiles felt forced, stretched thin. There were no greetings filled with warmth, no talk about family or memories. Straight away, the mood felt serious. They suggested walking a little farther along the path, away from the open area. The river moved slowly beside them, making soft sounds that usually felt peaceful. Today, that sound felt distant, like it belonged to another world. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Then one of the relatives finally broke the silence. The voice was calm, almost friendly, but the words were sharp. They spoke about responsibility, about how families should handle matters together, about how one person should not decide everything alone. The young adult listened without interrupting. When the talk turned toward paperwork and unfinished matters, it became clear where this was heading. There was no longer any effort to hide the real goal. The response came slowly and clearly. The will existed. It was legal. It would be respected. The change in their faces was instant. The friendliness disappeared. One of them laughed, but it was not a happy sound. It was short and cold. The other stepped closer, voice rising slightly, accusing the young adult of being selfish, of misunderstanding intentions, of trying to control what should belong to everyone. The young adult stood firm. The words were simple but steady. The father's wishes mattered. Nothing would change that. That was when the tone shifted completely. Voices grew louder. The calm walk turned into sharp steps. Demands replaced suggestions. They asked where the will was kept. They insisted it be handed over. The pressure came from both sides, words stacking on top of each other, leaving little space to think. The young adult felt fear rise but did not step back. Saying no again felt dangerous yet necessary. The riverbank narrowed ahead. The ground became uneven. The water looked darker here, moving faster than before. The young adult slowed down, sensing something was wrong. One of the relatives moved behind, blocking the path back. The other stood close in front. The space felt tight. The air felt heavy. There was one final demand. When it was refused, everything happened fast. Hands pushed forward. Balance was lost. The ground slipped away. The young adult fell toward the river, hitting the cold water hard. The shock stole the breath. The current pulled at clothes, dragging the body sideways. Panic rushed in, loud and overwhelming. But instinct fought back. Arms moved. Feet searched for something solid. The river was not deep, but it was strong. The young adult struggled, coughing, fighting the pull, focusing only on staying above water. Voices echoed from the bank. Not words of help. Words of anger, of warning, of threat. Using every bit of strength, the young adult grabbed onto a rock near the edge and pulled upward. Wet clothes weighed heavy, but determination was heavier. After several painful seconds, the body rolled back onto land. Lying there, soaked and shaking, the young adult looked up to see the two relatives stepping away. There was no concern in their faces, only fear of being seen, only regret that things had gone too far. They did not apologize. They did not offer help. They turned and left. The river kept flowing as if nothing had happened. For a long moment, the young adult stayed still, catching breath, feeling the cold sink deep into the skin. Hands trembled. Thoughts raced. What just happened felt unreal, like a bad dream playing too fast. Slowly, strength returned. Standing up hurt, but standing was possible. Water dripped onto the ground with each step away from the river. The walk back felt endless. Every sound felt louder. Every movement nearby caused the heart to race. But with each step, clarity grew. This was no misunderstanding. No family argument. This was an attempt to silence the truth. Reaching safety brought a mix of relief and anger. Clothes were changed. Bruises were checked. The body hurt, but it was alive. That night, sleep did not come at all. The mind replayed the moment again and again. The push, the water, the faces. Fear slowly turned into resolve. Silence would no longer protect anyone. Staying quiet would only invite worse. The next morning, the young adult spoke up. Details were shared carefully, truthfully. Not with drama, but with honesty. The incident by the river was described exactly as it happened. The will was mentioned. The pressure was explained. What followed was support. People listened. Questions were asked. The story did not sound exaggerated. Sounded real. Evidence existed. Messages. Witnesses from nearby paths. The sealed will itself. The young adult felt something shift inside. A weight lifted slightly. Speaking out brought fear, but it also brought strength. The two relatives tried to contact again. Messages arrived, softer now, filled with excuses and apologies that came too late. The messages were not answered. Part 3 ends here, with the truth no longer hidden, the danger exposed, and a quiet promise made to see things through the right way, no matter how difficult it became. Morning arrived with a strange mix of calm and tension. The body still ached from the fall, but the mind felt sharper than it had in weeks. What happened by the river could not be undone, but it could be faced. The young adult understood that this part of the story would not be loud or dramatic. It would be slow, careful, and built on truth. The first step was simple but difficult. Telling the full story to people who could help. Not everyone, not publicly, but to those who needed to know. The words came out steady, even when the memory tightened the chest. Details were shared clearly. There was no exaggeration, just facts. Support followed faster than expected. A trusted professional listened without interruption. Questions were asked in a calm way, not to doubt the story, but to understand it fully. The sealed envelope was brought forward. The will was reviewed. Everything was proper. Every signature was in place. The father's intentions were clear and protected. For the first time since finding the will, the young adult felt relief. Steps were taken to secure the documents officially. Copies were made. Records were stored safely. What had once been hidden out of fear was now protected by process and law. This did not erase the pain, but it removed the power from those who tried to take advantage. The relatives reacted quickly when they realized control was slipping away. Messages arrived filled with mixed emotions. At first, there was anger. Accusations followed, blaming the young adult for breaking the family. Then came excuses, long explanations that did not explain much at all. They spoke of misunderstandings, stress, and regret, carefully avoiding the truth of what they had done. There were even apologies. But apologies without accountability feel empty. The young adult read the messages once, then stopped responding. Silence was no longer weakness. It was protection. Word spread quietly through the family, not as gossip but as truth. Some people were shocked. Others were not surprised at all. A few admitted they had felt something was off but never expected it to go so far. Support came in small but meaningful ways. A phone call, a visit, a message that simply said, "You did the right thing." The house, once filled with tension, slowly became peaceful again. The study room no longer felt like a hiding place. It became a space for closure. Old papers were organized. Personal items were sorted with care. Some things were kept. Some were donated. Some were simply let go. Each decision felt like reclaiming a small piece of control. Physically, healing took time. Bruises faded slowly. Muscles stayed sore. But the pain reminded the young adult of survival. Of strength that had appeared when it was needed most. Emotionally, the healing was uneven. Some days felt light. Other days brought sudden waves of anger or sadness. Trust, once broken so deeply, does not rebuild quickly. There were moments of guilt too. Thoughts about whether things could have been handled differently. Whether meeting by the river had been a mistake. Those thoughts were answered with honesty. Greed does not need permission. It only needs opportunity. The responsibility for what happened did not belong to the one who was pushed. It belonged to those who chose to push. As weeks passed, the situation became clearer. Boundaries were set. Contact was limited. Any communication went through proper channels. The relatives who once felt bold now seemed distant and cautious. Their influence had faded. The young adult focused on rebuilding daily life. Work became a place of focus again. Routine returned slowly. Meals tasted better. Sleep came more easily. Laughter appeared unexpectedly, surprising and welcome. One evening, while sitting alone in the living room, the young adult thought about the father. Not with pain this time, but with gratitude. His planning had protected more than property. It had protected dignity. It had exposed the truth before it could do greater harm. A letter written by the father was found among old belongings. It was short and simple. It spoke about trust, about choosing what is right even when it is uncomfortable, and about standing firm without hatred. Reading it felt like hearing his voice again, calm and steady. That letter became a reminder. Justice does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly, through preparation and patience. through choosing honesty when silence feels easier. The relatives made one last attempt to reconnect. This time, the message was careful and distant. There was no demand, no pressure. Just an offer to talk. The young adult did not respond. Closure does not always require conversation. Instead, focus shifted toward the future. Plans were made. Small ones at first. Repairs around the house. A short trip. New goals. Each step forward felt earned. The incident by the river no longer defined every thought. It became part of the past, a chapter rather than the whole story. Part 4 ends here, not with revenge or celebration, but with quiet strength. With truth secured, boundaries drawn, and a life slowly returning to balance after betrayal tried, and failed, to take it away. Time has a quiet way of proving what really matters. Weeks turned into months, and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. The fear that once followed every sound faded, replaced by awareness and calm. The young adult no longer woke up with tension in the chest. The house felt like home again, not a place that needed guarding. The will was finalized through proper channels. Everything was done cleanly, honestly, and without drama. The father's wishes were respected exactly as he had written them. There were no surprises, no hidden twists, just fairness and clarity. That alone felt like a victory. The relatives who caused the pain faded further into the background. Their names were no longer spoken often. Family gatherings became smaller, quieter, but more genuine. The people who remained were those who truly cared. That change, though painful at first, brought peace. There were moments when memories returned without warning. The river, the push, the shock of cold water. Those moments still came, usually late at night. But they no longer carried the same power. Instead of fear, they brought understanding. Survival changes a person. It teaches strength that cannot be seen on the outside. The young adult chose not to carry hatred. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. Holding anger would have meant staying tied to what happened. Letting go meant moving forward. Daily life became fuller. Work improved. Focus returned. New opportunities appeared. There was pride in knowing that everything earned now stood on personal effort, not fear or loss. Small achievements felt meaningful. Even simple routines like morning walks or evening meals carried a sense of gratitude. The house was slowly refreshed. Walls were repainted. Old furniture was repaired instead of replaced. These changes were not about forgetting the past, but honoring it. The father had believed in building, not running away. That belief lived on. One quiet afternoon, the young adult sat in the study again, holding the father's old notebook. It was filled with simple thoughts, reminders, and plans written years ago. One sentence stood out more than the rest. It spoke about leaving things better than you found them. Not just places, but people. That sentence stayed. Instead of isolating from the world, the young adult opened up. Trust was rebuilt slowly with care. New friendships formed. Conversations became easier. Laughter returned without guilt. There was no need to tell everyone the full story. Some truths are personal. But when asked about the past, the response was honest and calm. No shame. No fear. The incident by the river became a lesson shared quietly with those who needed to hear it. About protecting yourself. About trusting your instincts. About understanding that not everyone close has good intentions, and that recognizing this does not make you weak. The relatives made no further attempts to interfere. Their silence became permanent. That silence no longer felt heavy, felt final. Looking back, the young adult realized how close everything came to falling apart. If the will had not been found in time, if instincts had been ignored, if silence had continued, the outcome could have been very different. That understanding brought humility, not fear. Life does not always warn you before it tests you. Sometimes it waits until you are already standing at the edge. But strength appears in those moments. The story does not end with celebration or applause. It ends with something quieter and stronger. Peace, confidence, the ability to stand firm without raising your voice. On a calm evening, as the sun set outside the same house that once held so much tension, the young adult felt gratitude. for survival, for truth, for the father's wisdom that continued to guide even in his absence. The river still flowed somewhere beyond town, unchanged. But it no longer held power over memory. It was simply part of the past. This final part closes not with loss, but with growth. Not with bitterness, but with clarity. A life protected by truth, shaped by hardship, and carried forward with strength. The end is not loud. It is steady, and that is enough.